The air in Boston that October felt like something out of a dream. Crisp but gentle, golden leaves swirling in the wind as if the city itself had decided to celebrate with us. That was the day I became Mrs. Emily Parker Whitmore. I can still see the lights of the grand ballroom, the gleam of crystal glasses, and the way Daniel's hand felt wrapped firmly around mine when we said our vows. Everything about that wedding shimmered. My parents had insisted on doing it properly, and Daniel's family was just as proud. But to me, the magic wasn't in the chandeliers or the champagne. It was in the way Daniel looked at me when I walked down the aisle, like I was the only person in the world. We had been together for 3 years before that day. 3 years of stolen weekends, late-night walks along the Charles River, and long conversations about the future we wanted. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I knew he was the one. Daniel was already making a name for himself as a promising young attorney, while I had just finished my degree in communications and started my first real job. We were young, ambitious, and in love, ready to build a life together. The wedding felt like the culmination of every dream I'd carried since I was a little girl, and the honeymoon that followed only deepened that feeling. Daniel made even the simplest moments special. Whether it was trying new foods at tiny restaurants, holding my hand on crowded streets, or whispering how lucky he felt, I believed him. I believed in us. The first years of our marriage were as close to perfect as anyone could imagine. Our apartment in Boston wasn't big, but it was ours. We filled it with books, framed photographs, and the scent of candles I insisted on buying every season. Daniel worked long hours at his law firm, often buried in case files, but he always came home with a smile. He'd drop his briefcase by the door, kiss me on the forehead, and ask about my day as if nothing mattered more. On weekends, we carved out time just for us. Sometimes it was as simple as walking through Boston Common. Sometimes it was trips we saved up for. Cape Cod in the summer, Maine in the fall. Every vacation became a small ritual of love. Daniel taking care of everything, me marveling at how he managed to balance work, responsibility, and still make me feel cherished. Friends often joked that we acted like newlyweds even years after the wedding. I didn't care how it looked. It was true. I would catch him watching me across the room and blush like a schoolgirl. He had this calm strength about him, a patience I'd never seen in anyone else. Even when things went wrong, missed trains, sudden downpours on trips, little accidents, Daniel never lost his temper. Instead, he'd laugh, find a solution, and somehow make me laugh too. I told myself more than once that if men with angelic tempers truly existed, then I had married one. He wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my safe place, my miracle. Looking back, it's almost painful how flawless those years felt. I had no reason to doubt him, no reason to fear the future. At that time, if someone had asked me to describe my life in one word, I would have chosen blessed. Because that's how it felt, like I had been given a gift so rare, so fragile, that nothing could ever take it away. Or so I thought. Not long after our 3rd anniversary, Daniel came home with a look in his eyes that I had only seen a handful of times before. It was the look he got when he was standing on the edge of something big. He hung his coat, loosened his tie, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Emily," he said, "I've just taken on a case unlike anything I've ever handled. This one could define my career." He wasn't exaggerating. His client was a powerful businessman in Boston, the kind of man who appeared in financial magazines and had his name on museum wings. The case? A divorce. Not just any divorce, but one involving assets that stretched into the hundreds of millions, mansions, art collections, antique jewelry, entire portfolios of investments. The wife was demanding half, though she had never worked a single day or contributed to his businesses. I listened as Daniel described the mountain of documents, the endless meetings, and the sheer weight of what was at stake. Part of me was proud. This was proof of how far he had come. At such a young age, to be trusted with something of this scale spoke volumes about his talent and reputation. But another part of me was uneasy. The way he described the wife, Relentless, demanding, manipulative, made me worry about what he was stepping into. "Are you sure this is worth it?" I asked him one night as he reviewed paperwork, well past midnight. "It sounds exhausting, Daniel, and dangerous in its own way." He smiled at me, that calm, reassuring smile I had fallen in love with. "Emily, this is what I was trained for. I know how to handle people like her. And besides, it's not just about money, it's about justice. He built everything with his own hands. She's trying to take what she never earned." I wanted to believe him, and for the most part I did. Still, as I watched him bury himself in briefs and depositions, a knot formed in my chest. When he finally sat down with the wife, the stories he told me afterward made my skin crawl. She carried herself like royalty, despite coming from nothing, and demanded a lifestyle that would cripple her husband financially. Daniel, with his composure and sharp mind, cut through her arguments one by one. He reminded her that most of the assets had been acquired before their marriage. He pressed on the fact that she had lived a life of luxury funded entirely by someone else's effort. In the end, she folded. She accepted a large apartment and a generous monthly allowance, but nothing close to the half she had been fighting for. Daniel came home that evening with a spark of triumph in his eyes, though he never gloated. "It's settled," he told me, slipping off his watch and setting it on the counter. "The papers will be signed tomorrow." He's satisfied, and frankly, so am I. True to his word, his client was more than satisfied. The man embraced Daniel in gratitude and immediately arranged for a hefty transfer to his account as payment for services. It wasn't just money, it was validation, recognition that Daniel Whitmore was a force to be reckoned with in the world of law. When Daniel called me after leaving his client's office, I could hear the relief in his voice. "Emily, I'll wrap everything up tomorrow morning, and then I'm coming straight home. No more late nights, no more endless calls. Just us." I remember smiling as I set the table that night, believing him, believing that once this storm passed, we'd return to the life we loved so much. That Friday evening, I wanted everything to be perfect. Daniel had promised the case was finally over, that he would be done with the endless negotiations and paperwork. I stopped by the market on my way home and bought his favorite wine, along with ingredients for a simple but elegant dinner. I wanted us to have a night to ourselves, away from clients, courts, and the constant stress. When my phone rang, I was setting candles on the table. Daniel's voice came through the line, warm and a little tired. "I'm in the garage now, Emily. Give me 15 minutes, and I'll be home." I laughed softly, telling him not to rush. "Drive safe. Dinner's almost ready." The call ended, and I felt a flutter of excitement. I lit the candles, dimmed the lights, and turned on the playlist we always used during dinners together. The apartment filled with the comforting aroma of roasted chicken and herbs. I imagined the look on his face when he walked in, saw the candles, and realized I had been waiting just for him. But 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. I called his phone, thinking maybe he'd been delayed by traffic. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I frowned, checking the clock again. Something didn't feel right. Daniel always kept his word. Even if he was running late, he would have called. By the time an hour had gone by, my hands were trembling. I called the parking garage where he usually left his car. The attendant confirmed what I already feared. Mr. Whitmore picked up his car about an hour ago. He should have left already. That was when the panic hit me full force. I threw on a coat and hurried downstairs, scanning the street as if he might suddenly appear around the corner. I walked block after block, checking familiar spots, calling his name under my breath. Nothing. The city felt too big, too dark, and suddenly hostile. I called my parents. My voice cracked as I tried to explain, but there wasn't much to say. Daniel had left the garage. He had never made it home. Next, I called the police. They took my statement, asked for details about his last known whereabouts, what he had been wearing, what car he drove. The words felt surreal leaving my mouth, as if I were describing a stranger, and not the man I had kissed goodbye that very morning. Hours slipped by in a blur of phone calls and tears. My parents rushed over, sitting with me in the candlelit apartment that now felt unbearably empty. The chicken had gone cold, the wine sat unopened. Every creak in the hallway, every car horn outside made me jolt, hoping it was him. But midnight came, then 2 a.m., then dawn, and still there was no sign of Daniel. That night was the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. My husband had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. One moment he was calling me from the garage, promising he was on his way home. The next he was gone without a trace. The days that followed Daniel's disappearance blurred into each other like a fog I couldn't escape. The police opened an investigation, but their words were cautious from the beginning. Adults have the right to disappear. One detective reminded me gently, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe that was the case here. They checked traffic cameras, questioned the garage attendants again, even canvassed nearby streets. But nothing. No witnesses, no accidents reported, no trace of his car. It was as if Daniel had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't accept that. I called his phone every hour, left voicemail after voicemail. I checked local hospitals, imagining he might have been in an accident and was waiting for me to find him. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt, only to crash back into emptiness when it was a friend, a neighbor, or another officer with no news. My parents and Daniel's parents stepped in quickly, trying to steady me. Together, we hired a private investigator, someone who promised he'd dig deeper than the police could. We printed posters with Daniel's photo, plastering them around Boston, on lampposts in grocery stores near subway stations. I posted his face online, begged for any information, even the smallest clue. Strangers reached out with sympathy, some with false leads, but none of it brought him back. Each morning, I woke up hoping it had been a nightmare, that I would roll over and see him lying next to me, breathing softly, the way he always did before work. But the bed was cold and reality was merciless. Weeks stretched into months, and with them came a slow unraveling of my mind. The constant questions: where was he? Was he hurt? Had someone taken him? Gnawed at me until I could no longer sleep, no longer eat. My body felt hollow, my hands shook without warning, and every corner of our apartment screamed his absence. Eventually, my parents made the decision for me. One evening, they guided me into the car and drove me to the hospital. I was admitted for treatment of severe depression and exhaustion. Lying in that sterile room, I felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a human being. I couldn't find him, couldn't even hold myself together. Nights in the hospital were the darkest. But slowly, with therapy and medication, I began to surface from the depths of despair. When I was discharged, nothing in the world had changed. Daniel was still gone. But I realized I had two choices: drown in grief or find any way to keep moving. My doctor urged me to establish a routine, to find work that would occupy my hands and mind. So I did. I accepted part-time jobs, simple things at first, tasks that forced me out of bed in the morning. It wasn't about money. It was survival. The busier I was, the less room there was for the crushing silence of our empty apartment. I told myself it wasn't moving on. It was simply moving forward, one fragile step at a time. Work became my lifeline. After the hospital, I knew I couldn't let myself sink back into the void. My doctor had been right. I needed something to occupy my mind, something that demanded focus and routine. That was when I accepted a position helping an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, a former ballet dancer who had once graced stages in New York. She lived alone in a modest but charming apartment near the Charles River. Age had taken much of her mobility, so she needed someone to cook, clean, and run errands. At first, I felt clumsy, out of place, like I didn't belong in her world of old posters, trophies, and the faint scent of lavender that lingered in every room. But Mrs. Henderson welcomed me warmly, and little by little, I found comfort in the rhythm of caring for her. The work didn't erase the pain, but it dulled the sharp edges. I swept floors, prepared simple meals, and listened as she reminisced about performances from decades past. There was something soothing about her stories, how she had loved, lost, and kept going. She didn't know the details of my own tragedy, but sometimes when she caught the faraway look in my eyes, she'd gently pat my hand and say, "You'll find your way too, dear. Grief never leaves us, but it teaches us to move." Over time, word spread that I was reliable and hardworking. Other families in Boston began calling me for occasional help. Deep cleaning, house sitting, light organizing. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy, and for that I was grateful. My days filled with tasks that left my body tired enough to sleep at night. Still, no matter how hard I tried, Daniel was always there in my mind. A song on the radio, a suit hanging in a client's closet, even the scent of his cologne on a stranger passing by. It all pulled me back to him. Some nights, I woke up convinced I had heard his key turning in the lock, only to be greeted by silence. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been hired to clean a grand estate in Back Bay, a sprawling townhouse owned by Victoria Reynolds, a woman whose name carried weight in Boston's business circles. The place was immaculate in a way that suggested money had smoothed over every corner. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, rooms lined with expensive art. I was dusting the shelves in the library when I heard it. A voice, deep and steady, drifting from the hallway. My heart clenched so hard I nearly dropped the vase in my hands. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the cadence, the tone, it was Daniel's voice. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears, straining to catch every word. It was just casual conversation, muffled by the distance, but every syllable pierced me with recognition. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I shook my head, gripping the edge of the shelf to steady myself. No, it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was imagining things, creating ghosts out of thin air because I missed him too much. That had to be it. And yet, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself it had been a trick of memory, a cruel echo conjured by loneliness. But the thought of that voice lingered, haunting me with every step. So when Victoria Reynolds called me again a few weeks later to return to the townhouse, I felt a knot of dread twist inside my stomach. Still, I went. Work was work, and I couldn't refuse. I was wiping down the marble counter in her kitchen when the sound of the front door opening startled me. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, confident, measured, achingly familiar. I turned, rag still in my hand, and froze. He walked in as though he belonged there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. For a split second, the world tilted. My heart leapt into my throat because I knew that face, even though it wasn't exactly the same. It was Daniel, but not the Daniel I had last kissed goodbye. His hair was shorter, neatly styled. A jagged scar traced along his left cheekbone. His eyes, once warm and steady, now seemed distant, guarded. And when those eyes landed on me, there was no flicker of recognition, no softening, no smile, only a faint narrowing of suspicion, as though I were nothing more than an intruder in his world. "Mr. Alexandrovich," Victoria's voice rang from the hallway, smooth and polished. "You're home early." I felt my knees weaken. Alexandrovich. That was the name she used. My mouth went dry as I whispered his name under my breath. "Daniel!" He glanced at me briefly, but there was no spark of memory. Nothing. He simply nodded toward Victoria, then walked past me without a word. It felt as though someone had carved open my chest. I stumbled through the rest of my tasks, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the dishes. When I finally left the house, the cold air outside hit me like a slap. I could barely breathe. That night, I sat with my parents at their dining table, recounting everything in broken fragments. "It was him," I insisted, gripping my mother's hand as though it could anchor me. The scar, the voice, the way he moved, it was Daniel. But he didn't know me. He looked right at me and my voice cracked. Nothing. My father frowned, exchanging a worried glance with my mother. Emily, grief can play cruel tricks. Are you sure? I am sure, I said fiercely, tears burning down my cheeks. I know my own husband. They didn't argue, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. That was when I called the private investigator again. This time, I begged him to follow Victoria, to uncover who this so-called Dmitry Alexandrovich really was. Weeks later, he returned with the truth. The pieces fit together in a way that made me shiver. Daniel had been attacked the night he disappeared, beaten, and left unconscious near the entrance to Victoria's estate. She had found him, taken him in, and when he awoke, his memory was gone. With her influence and wealth, she arranged new documents under a new identity. And just like that, my husband became her husband. Hearing it out loud left me numb. Daniel hadn't chosen to leave me. He hadn't abandoned our life. He had been stolen, reshaped into someone else's story. And the worst part, he didn't even know it. The night I received the investigator's report, I barely slept. By morning, my decision was made. I walked into the police precinct with trembling hands, but a steady voice, carrying every piece of evidence I had. I showed them photographs, timelines, and the investigator's written statement. Dmitry Alexandrovich, I said firmly, is my husband, Daniel Whitmore. He disappeared 2 years ago. He didn't run away, he was taken. The detective listened carefully, his expression unreadable. At first, I feared he might dismiss me, chalk it up to a grieving widow's delusion. But when he examined the scars, the matching dental records, the timeline that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence, his tone shifted. We'll look into this, he said, but you have to understand, it won't be simple. The next days were agonizing. The police questioned Victoria Reynolds. She arrived with her team of attorneys, polished and unshaken, as though she were walking into a business meeting rather than an interrogation. At first, she denied everything, but as the evidence piled up, she conceded just enough to protect herself. Yes, she had taken in a man who had been found near her home, injured and confused. Yes, she had provided medical care. Yes, she had given him a new life. But in her version, it wasn't abduction, it was charity. He had no memory of who he was, she told the officers. He was vulnerable. I cared for him when no one else did. He became my husband because he wanted stability, because I gave him a home. Her words made my stomach twist, but the detective wasn't swayed. Daniel, Dmitry, was ordered to undergo medical evaluation at Massachusetts General Hospital. They needed to know if his amnesia was real, if his identity matched the records I had provided. The day they transferred him, I stood in the hospital corridor, palms damp, heart racing like I was about to face a stranger and a ghost at once. When they wheeled him into the examination room, I caught my first clear look at him without the barrier of Victoria's presence. It was Daniel, my Daniel. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders, the small scar on his right wrist from when he'd cut himself opening it years ago. I stepped forward, whispering his name. Daniel, it's me. Emily. He looked at me with polite confusion, as though I were nothing more than another doctor or nurse hovering nearby. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice calm but empty. I don't know you. The words cut deeper than any knife. I tried again, showing him a photograph of our wedding, our life together. His eyes lingered on the image, but instead of recognition, there was only unease. Then he turned his head, searching the room until he found her. Victoria stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. And when Daniel's gaze landed on her, it softened. That's my wife, he said simply. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. In that moment, I realized this battle was only beginning. The court ordered that Daniel stay with me and my parents while the doctors worked on his memory rehabilitation. It felt surreal preparing the guest room for him, knowing that just a few years ago we had shared a life, a bed, a future, and now he was a stranger under our roof. At first, he was polite but distant, speaking in short, careful sentences. He thanked my mother when she made him breakfast. He nodded when my father tried small talk about sports, but his eyes remained clouded, as if he were trying to map out a world that didn't fit. When I approached him with photo albums, his posture stiffened, but he didn't turn away. I laid the album on the table one evening, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. "This was our wedding," I whispered, pointing to the photograph of us beneath a canopy of autumn leaves in Boston. His younger self beamed from the photo, eyes bright with joy. Daniel studied the picture carefully. His gaze lingered on the tuxedo, the smile, the way his arm wrapped around me. For a moment, something flickered, an almost imperceptible softness. But then it was gone. "It feels familiar," he admitted, "but I can't place it." I swallowed hard and tried again. I told him about our trips to Cape Cod, about how he once carried me across the beach because my shoes had broken. I described the night he had stayed up until dawn, helping me rehearse for a presentation, even though he had court the next morning. Little pieces of our life, hoping to light a spark. He listened quietly, sometimes tilting his head as if the stories brushed against the edge of his memory. But when I asked if he remembered, he only shook his head, his voice heavy with frustration. "I want to, Emily, but it's like trying to grab smoke." Meanwhile, Victoria refused to let go. She showed up at the hospital during his checkups, hovering in the waiting area with flowers and expensive gifts. Once, she even appeared outside my parents' house, demanding to see him. I closed the door in her face, but not before hearing the desperation in her voice. "He's mine now," she hissed. "You're clinging to the past." Her words burned. But I reminded myself this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about Daniel's truth, his life, our marriage that had been stolen from us. Still, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes wavered whenever her name was mentioned. At night, I sometimes found him standing by the window, staring into the dark, shoulders tense. "It's like I'm split in two," he confessed once, his voice low. "Part of me feels safe here, with you, but another part feels like I owe her everything. She saved me." I wanted to scream that she had only taken advantage of his broken state, but I held my tongue. His pain was real, his confusion undeniable. All I could do was stay close, reminding him of the life we had built, hoping that somewhere inside, my Daniel was still there, waiting to come back to me. It was the doctor who suggested we try something different. "Sometimes memory isn't restored by pictures or stories," he explained. "Sometimes it takes a place, a sensation, to trigger what the brain has locked away." His words stayed with me until one evening, when I found myself driving Daniel back toward the garage where he had last called me, the place where his life with me had ended. As we pulled in, I felt my chest tighten. The structure hadn't changed. Same rows of concrete pillars, same fluorescent lights humming overhead. To me, it was a graveyard of hope. To Daniel, it was still just a parking garage. He stepped out of the car slowly, scanning the rows as though trying to make sense of why we were there. "Emily, I don't." His voice trailed off. His hand went to his temple. "Just walk with me," I whispered. We moved down the ramp together, our footsteps echoing. I led him toward the spot where his car had been parked that night. As soon as we stopped, his body stiffened. He gripped the railing beside him, breath quickening. And then it happened. He staggered, clutching his head, and let out a choked sound. His knees buckled, and I caught his arm to steady him. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, and tears spilled before he could stop them. "I remember," he gasped. Images poured back into him, jagged and violent. He told me in broken phrases, men stepping out of the shadows, fists slamming into his ribs, the sharp metallic taste of blood in his mouth, hands dragging him across cold pavement, then darkness. When he woke, Victoria was there, telling him his name was Dimitri, telling him his past was gone. His voice broke as he pressed his forehead against my shoulder. "Emily, I didn't leave you. I never left you. I wrapped my arms around him, tears streaming down my own face. I know, I whispered fiercely. I knew something was wrong. I never stopped believing. We stood there in the hollow quiet of the garage, clinging to each other as though we could make up for every lost year. For the first time since his disappearance, I felt Daniel's embrace, not as a stranger's, but as my husband's. When we returned home, the police were waiting to hear everything. Daniel gave his statement, describing the ambush in as much detail as his memory allowed. The detectives' faces hardened. This was no random attack. They reopened the case immediately, launching a full investigation into who had orchestrated it. For the first time in years, there was movement, momentum, a path toward justice. As for me, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Hope, not the fragile, desperate hope that had haunted me since his disappearance, but something stronger. Daniel remembered. He was mine again, and together we would find the truth. The investigation moved quickly once Daniel's memories returned. His testimony, combined with the private investigator's earlier findings, gave the detectives a clear direction. Within weeks, the truth came into focus. The attack had not been random, nor was it some desperate act by strangers. It had been orchestrated by none other than the man Daniel had defended in the divorce case, the wealthy businessman who had so desperately wanted to protect his fortune. It was almost unthinkable. Daniel had won that case, saved the man millions, and yet, behind the scenes, enemies were made. The wife's family, furious over the settlement, had connections, money, and more than enough bitterness to act on their anger. They had paid for Daniel to be silenced. Permanently. Hearing the details made my blood run cold. I could picture it so clearly now. Daniel stepping into the garage, unaware of the shadows lurking, unaware that his life was about to be ripped away. The men who carried out the attack were eventually tracked down, arrested, and charged. And with them, the names of those who had ordered it came to light. Justice, long overdue, was finally in motion. The day the indictments were announced, Daniel and I stood together outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but I barely noticed. All I cared about was the way his hand tightened around mine, grounding me in the reality that we had survived. He had survived. From there, the process of restoring his identity began. It was strange, seeing official documents with another man's name erased and replaced with his true one, Daniel Whitmore. He was no longer Dmitry Alexandrovich. He was my husband again, legally and irrevocably. The moment the paperwork was finalized, I felt as though a chain had been broken. Victoria Reynolds fought the decision at first, clinging to the life she had built with him. She appeared in hearings, argued that she had saved him, loved him, and deserved to keep him. But in the end, even she couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't hers. He never had been. When the final ruling came down, I saw her face in the courtroom. Beautiful, composed, but utterly devastated. She looked at Daniel one last time, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and then she turned away. It would be easy to hate her, to reduce her to nothing more than a villain. But part of me understood her grief. She hadn't attacked Daniel. She had found a broken man and built a life around him, however misguided. Losing him must have felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. For us, though, it was the beginning of something new. Daniel moved back into our apartment, though it took time for both of us to adjust. The memories were there now, but fragile, like glass that had been shattered and pieced back together. Some days he woke with fragments missing, and I would remind him patiently. Other days he remembered things I had long forgotten, small details, private jokes, and we would laugh until tears filled our eyes. We learned to live slowly, deliberately, savoring what we had nearly lost. Dinners at home felt sacred. Walks through the city became a quiet celebration. Even the ordinary moments, folding laundry together, sharing coffee in the morning, carried weight and meaning. We no longer assumed time was promised. We cherished it as the gift it truly was. Looking back now, I realize our story was never about perfection. It was about resilience, about choosing each other, even when the world tried to tear us apart. Love doesn't erase suffering. It doesn't shield us from betrayal or loss, but it endures, it heals, and sometimes it brings us back from the very edge of forgetting. I once thought I had lost Daniel forever. Now, every time he takes my hand, every time he says my name with recognition in his eyes, I know the truth. Real love can survive even the cruelest storms. It can overcome loss, deception, and even the shadows of memory itself.